obviously there's travel to take into consideration, and the way the tournament, the framework of the tournament, the agreements that we've looked at is that each team will travel with a maximum of 20 people in their party. Now, and what that means is that the home team sorts out the logistics in the country. So that will include how you get the away teams to the ground, where the away teams stay, a meal after the game. The away teams pay for their travel to get to the country.
Okay.
So by having 20, what that means is that we will have to find, and it's agreed that it's 10 bedrooms, so people share a room.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to bring more, that's fine. Then they can pay for that, and we can work out how that arrangements work. But one of the advantages we've got, which is similar to FC United and to some extent Enfield, is we get good crowds. And the amount of revenue we generate on a match day for a normal match day in midweek is still pretty good. We tend to generate a lot in food and drink, which is fantastic. So having these 2 additional home games will fund a lot of the additional costs.
Okay.
We will obviously talk to our sponsors and our commercial partners to see how they could potentially get involved, and we've had some positive discussions with them already. The interesting one is if we do reach the finals, because if you reach the finals, then you get a share of the gate receipts for the 4 games. It's essentially a split 4 ways, but the crowds won't necessarily be that big. There was only, I think there was like 400 or 300 in the San Siro for the 2 games last year in the final. So at that point there, I mean, it'll be a lovely problem to have, and we'll look at how we can, fund that. But again, we're not talking about massive amounts of revenue here. Flights to popular destinations for something like a Copenhagen in a few months' time, that's 70 or 80 pound return. So times that by 20 people, that's your cost base.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear like the logistics of what goes into it, and I just hope that we make the finals. But I think like people are talking about these European away days and stuff, but I think being at the Pan, will it be a midweek night or will it be Saturday? Yeah, midweek night.
Well,
night.
Potentially, I mean, if the opportunity arises for it to be over weekend, then absolutely we would look at that. But it's unlikely, and the other reason why it's likely that it won't start until November is that obviously there are going to be teams that are in. I mean, who's to say ourselves we don't go on a really good cup run in the FA Cup or the FA Trophy, which therefore means that you've got to shift other games. So we don't want to be in a situation where we're having to have a fixture nightmare in September already. So that's what tends to happen. Again, talking to the guys at FC United, I think they only played the 1 game prior to Christmas, and then they played February, March, April. So we'll see. We'll get a little bit more. Well, we'll get a lot more clarity tomorrow, and then over the next few weeks as we start to work out the fixtures and the logistics.
Brilliant. Yeah. I was about to say just midweek night at the Pan with a European night would just be unreal to experience, like in terms of the atmosphere as well. I can see it really being like an unforgettable night. So you get a couple nights a season at the Pan, like the midweek nights where the atmosphere can be really good. Like I remember like 𝗬𝗏𝗄𝐿 last season, for a midweek game, I remember thinking that was like an incredible atmosphere to be a part of. So hopefully, we get to see that again. But also, I saw online as well that I think maybe you said that all the revenue's not split for the home games as well. No, so we get all correct. Yeah. It is split.
So it's not split, no.
Oh,
so we get the revenue. So for FA Cup and FA Trophy games, not only do we have to split the gate, but we also have to pay a significant amount of the travel costs as well, which is it's worked out on a specific FA calculator. So whilst, you know, playing someone like 𝗬𝘂 might be attractive, our costs go up because obviously 𝗬𝘂 are coming from so far away. And obviously, so that's why in the first few rounds of the FA Cup and the FA Trophy, they do tend to be quite regionalised, just to cut down on costs of the club involved. You know, for us, the worst. And again, you know, I'll whisper this quietly, but you know, one of the worst things that happens in the FA Cup is we draw a team from step 7 or 6 or 5 who aren't particularly local at home, because we have to split that revenue. And there have been cases, there have been FA Cup runs and FA Trophy runs, certainly in my time here, where we have lost money.
Wow.
It's and unfortunately, you know, it's something that's raised constantly with the FA about there should be sort of like minimum, especially when you look at the prize money in the FA Cup from higher up. There will be clubs that, and it's not just the men's game, the women's game as well. It's even worse in the FA Cup there. Teams will regularly lose money. Clapton, I think, from memory, a few years ago, had to travel to Plymouth and they lost thousands.
Blimey.
Yeah, and because the prize money wasn't there, but also it's just madness.
Yeah, I've never actually thought of it like that before. It's actually definitely opened like a new way of looking at things with the FA Cup. But yeah, hopefully we don't get that. Sorry, Ben's outside. So that leads me on to my next question. It's sort of relevant to Europe as well, but it's a bit more of a personal question to you. So obviously on your socials, we see you going to all these different games, and as you said at the beginning of the interview, you're up in Scotland watching Queen's Park. You know, so you're always at games. So how do you find the time to do all this? Because it's it's pretty impressive. Like, I'm quite jealous, to be honest. But
I mean, I've always, you know, for 20 odd years, I've traveled to watch football. That's what I've done. You know, when I first started writing about football, it was because there was a real gap in the market. You know, people didn't necessarily trust everything in the internet. People didn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily the easiest place to navigate. Give me 2 secs, just got onto the door. 2 secs.
Yeah.
Sorry. So you know, I saw a gap in the market, and decided that that's what I was going to sort of focus on my writing about, which is what I did, and it you know, sort of grew from there, and I got well known for some of the stuff I was doing. So some of the writing gigs and some of the travel, you know, it's funded, and that's how I grew, you know, one element to what I do outside of Lewes. But it's also about just planning ahead and looking at how I can work and where I can work. Again, you know, one of the things that COVID did was it allowed people to work more remotely.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'll have some days where my work just will involve sitting in a room like this and just working on documents or working on a presentation or working on a consultancy piece for somebody. And I can do that from anywhere. I can do that from anywhere. So I tend to use my time wisely. I'm not someone that will ever really sit in front of a TV of a night. I'll always be doing something. I'll always be, you know, working on something. So that gives me the opportunity to sort of develop what I want to do. And travel has always been, you know, something that's I'm really passionate about. Combine that with football and cricket, and you know, that's what I do in my spare time.
Yeah, I wish I could do more of it, to be honest.
It's so much easier than it used to be. It's funny, I'm working on a book at the moment, which is, you know, basically looking at a game a day. So you know, every day in the last 30 years, if I've been to a game and what it was and where it was. And yesterday I was looking at one, and it was the first ever time I went to Copenhagen. And I remember to get there in the year, this was the year 2000. You couldn't fly direct. There was only BA and SAS flew there direct, and the cost of doing that was huge. So you had to change in Brussels, and it was like 7 hours in total to get there. So the whole world has really changed now. So there's so much more on, things like getting tickets. The amount of times used to be asked, "Oh, how'd you get tickets for Milan? How'd you get tickets for Barcelona? How'd you get tickets for Real Madrid?" And the internet has changed all of that, and everything's now become so much easier and accessible. It works really well.
Oh, that's interesting. That leads me on to my next question. It's a bit more, again, a bit more about like your history about with Lewes. What inspired? Actually, I'm quite interested about this because with all the amount of times we've spoken, I don't think I've actually really ever known this. So I'm quite interested to hear about this. But what inspired you to become so heavily involved at Lewes to the point where you became chairman? So when did you start going to Lewes games, basically? So like from the start.
Yeah. So actually, it relates back to sort of what I've just been talking about. So I developed this sort of quite a big internet presence for talking about European football, especially about travel to go to European football. Sort of just before the World Cup in Germany, I saw an opportunity. It was very hard to get information for traveling fans going to watch the World Cup. So I decided I'd just taken a voluntary redundancy and been paid off quite nicely. And I kept moaning about this to my wife. And she said, rather than moan about it, do something about it. So I said, well, what? And she went, okay. Well, she goes, why don't you write a book? And I laughed. And she went, no, seriously, why don't you write a book? And so I thought about it and thought, actually, you know what? There's an opportunity to write a travel guide for the World Cup in Germany. So every other week for 3 months, I went to Germany. And I went for 3 days, and I stayed in hotels. I stayed in I went to bars, and I wrote this book, self-published it, did phenomenally well, sold the rights to it. And I came across a guy called Danny Last.
Oh, yeah.
And Danny had set up this website called European Football Weekends. And he reached out to me. We chatted a few times online. And he was a Brighton fan. And this was all down at the time that Brighton had been forced out the Goldstone, and the ground was there sold, and they'd gone to Gillingham. And he said, I've just started going to this great little club down the road called Lewes. He said, the football's crap. He said, but people are really nice and you can have a beer. I didn't even know where Lewes was. I'd never even heard of it. And so I agreed to meet him at a game. And it was the season that Lewes, the one season they were in the conference.
Oh, wow.
What was the Premier conference?
Yeah.
So came down, met him, and Cynical Dave, God rest his soul, in a pub. And had a chat, went to the game. He was right. The football was absolutely terrible. It was appalling. But the people were really nice, and I enjoyed it. And so I went to a couple more games that season. I was slowly falling out of love with West Ham. So I was West Ham season ticket holder. I'd done some work with them on the commercial side, trying to find a shirt sponsor for them. And then Sullivan and Gold came in, and they just like disrespected everybody, and it changed completely. So over the next couple of years, I started going more to Lewes. I started going away to Lewes, and it was like the old days of when I was in my 20s going to watch West Ham. Train, cans on the train, really good laugh. Football became irrelevant. It was all about your day out, and it was great fun. And went to places like Weston-super-Mare, Oxford City, Kidderminster, really grounds that you knew you were going to get absolutely whacked at, but it didn't matter because you was going to have a good day out.